Good evening, comrades and friends. Welcome to the program Global Weekly News, serial number 211. I had been to Kodaikanal on a family tour with my second daughter's family for 3 days. That is why there is a delay in presenting this 211th serial of Global Weekly News. First item, anti-NATO rally, Turkey. North Atlantic Treaty Organization's NATO's meeting was held in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, on July 7 and 8. Hundreds marched against NATO summit in Turkey. NATO serves one purpose: to preserve capitalism through bloodshed, bombs, oppression, and exploitation. The summit, which kicked off on 7th July, prompted a massive security crackdown and a two-week ban on all demonstrations in the province. The rally, organized by the Communist Party of Turkey, was in explicit solidarity with the people of Palestine, Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba. Protesters called for Turkey to shutter all foreign military bases and immediately withdraw from the alliance. The rallies carried the placards saying, NATO wants war, workers want peace. We need budget for the people, not for NATO. Second item, comrades. 1,000 days of Palestinians genocide in Gaza by Israel. 3rd July 2026 marked 1,000 days of Israel's genocide in Gaza. 1,000 days of a live-streamed genocide, domicide, scholasticide, reprocide, familicide, and every act of destruction inflicted upon occupied people, upon every protected group, and every act of Palestinian survival. 1,000 days in which Israel stole too soon more than 73,000 lives. Lives we will never have the privilege of knowing, meeting, having, loving, or mourning as they deserve. 1,000 days of relentless attempts to erase Gaza, to empty it of its people, and drive Palestinians from their land. 1,000 days later, no one can say they did not know. The question of history, will ask is not whether evidence existed. It did. The evidence existed. The question is how so many people saw it unfolding in real time and still chose to look away. Third item, comrades. A British luxury train and 24,000 Indian workers' death. It was in the 19th century when the British began laying railway networks in India, and their aim was not development but strengthening the trade and empire. This is the story of the Deccan Queen, a train that today runs between Mumbai and Pune. The scenic route that mesmerizes millions today is actually built on the pain and sacrifice of Indian laborers. As part of this plan, a difficult railway route was constructed through the Bore Ghat to connect Mumbai with the Deccan platform, a project that required around 42,000 Indian workers. With no safety measures, these workers labored in extremely dangerous conditions, hanging from ropes on steep mountain and breaking rocks with bare hands. They worked under the constant shadow of death. The responsibility of this construction was in the hands of a ruthless British contractor, William Faviel, who forced laborers to work day and night, denied them rest even when they were injured, and frequently withheld their wages. By 1859, conditions became unbearable and the workers revolted, but the British crushed the uprising with brutality. During the monsoon of 1859 to 60, conditions worsened further. Stagnant water at the foothills led to deadly diseases like malaria and cholera, claiming thousands of lives. Landslides, broken ropes, and falling rocks made death a daily reality. It is estimated that around 24,000 workers lost their lives during the construction of this railway line. But for the British, it was just a number. On 21st August 1863, when the railway line was inaugurated, Mumbai's governor, Sir Bartle Frere, called it a marvel of engineering. British officials described it as the beginning of the railway age in colonial India. The route included 25 tunnels, 23 bridges, and 60 culverts, but not a single mention was made of the workers whose blood and sweat made it possible. Later, on 1st June 1930, the luxury train Deccan Queen was introduced on this very track, allowing the British to comfortably enjoy the beauty of the hills. Today, when this train passes through the lavish green guards and tunnels, we see only beauty. But the truth is, this route was not built merely with iron and stone, but with the sacrifice of thousands of unnamed workers. If we simply remain silent on the implementation of four labor codes, we will become neo slaves like in the British period. Therefore, let us pledge to make the calls of coming 29th July All India Convention of Central Trade Unions and Samyukta Kisan Morcha at Delhi a success. We can only win if we take an offensive line against neoliberalism. Comrades, now we go to China. Item number 4. China affirms modern socialist society by 2049, 100th year of its revolution. The ruling Communist Party of China celebrated its 105th anniversary on 1st July with a resolve to press ahead to make China into a modern socialist country by 2049. Chinese President and the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, Xi Jinping, called the history of the Communist Party of China the most magnificent epic of the Chinese nation. Formed in Shanghai in 1921 with a total membership of just 50, today the Communist Party of China boasts of a membership of over 10.1 crore members with over 54 lakhs primary level organizations. The Communist Party of China has been in power in China since the establishment of the People's Republic after the 1949 revolution. During the celebration ceremony, President Xi Jinping conferred 8 individuals the July 1 medal, the party's highest honor. The individuals have made outstanding contributions in their respective field of action, including a grassroots mediator, a village party official, a veteran, a rural doctor, a community worker, an agricultural specialist, a mechanical engineer, and a refining engineering expert. Xi Jinping emphasized that its members should never forget the original aspiration and founding mission of the party. We always stay modest, prudent, and hardworking, and that we have the courage and ability to carry on our fight. He also asked the party members to be ready to face future challenges and risks. Inspired by the Great October Revolution of Soviet Union in 1917 and the ideas and works of Karl Marx, the Communist Party of China started a movement against the country's feudal rulers with the help of the country's vast peasant classes and under the leadership of Mao Zedong. After 2 decades of struggle against feudalism and colonial occupation, the People's Republic of China was declared in 1849. The Communist Party of China spent its first 2 decades in power, creating the grounds for building a socialist society by dismantling feudal structure under a centralized planning system. Later, under the new leadership of Deng Xiaoping in 1878, the Communist Party of China began an era of reform for faster economic development. The surplus thus generated has been used to build rural infrastructure, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, and investments in science and technology since then. Xi Jinping reiterated that the reintegration of Taiwan with the mainland is a historic mission and expressed hope that the People's Liberation Army under its control would resolutely defend China's sovereignty, security, and development interests and make great contributions to safeguarding world's peace and development. Now we see the barbaric Trump violating the Iran ceasefire deal. On 28 February, US and Israel launched a sudden attack on Iran and killed its supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and some army veterans. The funeral of Khamenei was postponed for a few months and recently it took place. More than 1.5 crore people took part in the mourning rally. In many cities of Iran and Iraq, funeral processions are held continuously. US expected regime change in Iran but was disappointed. As a diversion of funeral mood of the people, US 20 days after the ceasefire deal was arrived at with Iran launched targeted attacks on 160 centers. 14 Iranians died, more than 78 got injured. Trump announced the end of ceasefire deal on 8 July. He said that the US will seize control of Karg Island of Iran. Last month, US withdrew its blockade of Hormuz Strait as per the deal. After the NATO summit, Trump announced that US will again blockade the Hormuz Strait. He also said that there is no plan to restart the war with Iran. Due to US attacks, Iran's civilian infrastructure got damaged. This is a war crime, Iran charged. Iran is responsible for the attack on 3 commercial ships passing through an alternative route in the Hormuz Strait, US Army declared. Iran denied this accusation. Iran also said that ships shall not pass through alternative routes. As a response to US airstrikes, Islamic Revolutionary Army Corps launched attacks on US military bases in Bahrain and Kuwait. In 5th para of the ceasefire deal, it has been stated that in consultation with the Persian Gulf states, only Iran has the power to manage the Hormuz Strait. In violation of this para, Israel relaunched attacks on Lebanon and US imposed new sanctions on Iran's oil, Iran said. Next, comrade, we go to Cuba and the United Nations. 136 nations support Cuba in the UN General Assembly. Cuba has just secured another decisive diplomatic victory at the United Nations. The international community has voted overwhelmingly in favor of placing on the UN agenda the urgent necessity of ending the US economic, commercial, and financial blockade against Cuba. During the UN session, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parilla described the embargo as a multidimensional war, arguing that it has severely affected Cuba's economy, healthcare, energy sector, and daily lives of its people. Several countries, including Russia, Mexico, China, and members of the non-aligned movement, voiced support for Cuba during the debate, calling for an end to unilateral sanctions and warning of their humanitarian impact. The US has consistently maintained that its sanctions are intended to promote democratic change and hold the Cuban government accountable, while Cuba argues the US measures violate international law and should be lifted. Cuba is now suffering yearly economic loss of $756 due to the US sanctions. 756 crore dollars, I think. Due to US sanctions on Cuba for more than 6 decades, Cuba incurred an accumulated loss of 2.1 lakh crore dollars, 2.1 trillion dollars. Trillion means 1 lakh crore. So 2.1 lakh crore dollars. In 26, Cuba's GDP has fallen by 24%. Cuba is now facing Melissa hurricane also. Cuban people will defend the homeland at any cost. Cuba will win, Rodriguez said. Lastly, comrade, NATO summit in Turkey. NATO summit took place in Ankara, capital of Turkey, on July 7 and 8. Leaders of 32 member countries, including Trump, took part in this summit. United States has been pressurizing member states of NATO to allot 5% of its GDP towards military expansion. NATO's General Secretary Mark Rutte announced that already European allies of NATO and Canada are spending 4% of their GDP towards military expense. Mark Rutte also said that military-industrial cooperation agreements were arrived at between countries on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. US major military arms manufacturing companies, including Anduril, Boeing, General Dynamics Land Systems, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon, have agreed to involve themselves in new industrial cooperation initiatives of major European companies. Communist Party of Greece, KKE, has said that since 1949, the founding of NATO, it has been serving the interests of capitalism and imperialism. NATO is functioning as an imperialist army wing against people, as anti-communist army and opposed to revolutionary movement. Thank you, comrades. Lal Salam. See you next week.